So hello and welcome to this webinar special session for Pharma Logistics Africa, convened under the theme Vaccine Production and Logistics, from local production, distribution to access and adoption. My name is Janet Byaruhanga, the Senior Program Officer at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. But before we start this important event, permit me to take you through some housekeeping announcements. The webinar will be conducted in English. Please make sure that you are muted throughout the webinar if you're not speaking. Use the video option if possible. You can also use the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, you can use the button below your screen for asking questions and making comments. Attendees that wish to intervene may raise their hand using the feature on Zoom. There will be a post-webinar report which will be published that will highlight concrete themes, challenges, solutions, and recommendations that will have been identified during the discussions during this webinar from stakeholders. We will also make sure to take note of any unanswered questions and ensure that they are covered in the report. Once again, thank you for joining this conversation. Distinguished representatives from the hosting organizations, Mr. Andrew Dowell, CEO of GRV Global, Ms. Jennifer Chiriga, representing Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, the CEO of the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, distinguished keynote speakers, Mr. Andrew Owain Jones, the Principal Advisor and Vaccine Center Chief, Supply Division at UNICEF, esteemed panelists who will introduce themselves during the panel discussion, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, joining us from across the African continent and beyond. Permit me now to start this session by informing you what we expect from this session. We are going to be expecting that by the end of this session, we will be able to identify at least some potential partnerships to strengthen regional and international cooperation between public and private sector across the African pharma sector ecosystem. We will be able to discuss and analyze outcomes which will define problems and consider potential solutions to improve the pharma ecosystem in Africa, particularly in relation to logistics and supply chain aspects. We will also be able to publish a report with concrete themes, challenges, and recommended solutions. We will also be able to set the scene for the third edition of the Pharma Logistics Africa edition, scheduled to take place on the 8th and the 9th of December this year, which will focus on all the aspects of supply chain logistics and distribution, healthcare innovation, legislation and supply chain planning, supply chain resilience, and action in disaster relief and emergency situations. Once again, I want to invite now the first speaker, who is going to deliver welcome remarks on behalf of Dr. Ibrahim Assane Mayaki. Her name is Ms. Jennifer Chiriga. Again, to remind you, the theme of this session is Pharma Logistics. It is convened under the theme Vaccine Production and Logistics, from local production and distribution to access and adoption. Ms. Jennifer Chiriga, you have the floor for the welcome remarks on behalf of the CEO of NEPAD. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. A very good afternoon to the distinguished panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor today to represent Dr. Ibrahim Assane Mayaki, and on his behalf to welcome you to this special session of Pharma Logistics Africa. Allow me to present Dr. Mayaki's sincere apologies for not attending this session in person due to prior equally pressing commitments. Let me start by thanking our co-hosts, GRV Global, for the effort that has gone into organizing this event, and to all participants from across the African continent and beyond that have joined us on this online platform. We look forward to your invaluable comments and suggestions towards improving access to much needed vaccines and other medical products. We believe that local production of pharmaceuticals will help member states enhance health service delivery by improving access to essential medicines and strengthening economic autonomy and sustainable development. In 2005, African member states adopted the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, which envisions an Africa where people have access to essential quality, safe, and effective medical products and technologies facilitated by a competitive, self-reliant pharmaceutical industry. With the slow progress that Africa had been making in strengthening local pharmaceutical production, the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the inadequacies of the pharma ecosystem, and these should be addressed urgently as they are a major threat to livelihoods. As part of AUDA-NEPAD's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, a series of webinars aimed at galvanizing Africa's local industry to provide the requisite COVID-19 medical supplies and equipment were conducted in 2020. These webinars generated a wealth of knowledge and lessons learned, which continue to inform current initiatives and efforts at the national, regional, and continental levels. As member states recover from the impact of the pandemic and introduce economic recovery efforts, supporting local manufacturing of pharmaceutical products in Africa must be considered as a strategic economic input, with an important role to play as a national and continental security issue that mitigates against shortages in the supply of essential medical products, including vaccines. The implementation of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, under the leadership of AUDA-NEPAD, provides an opportunity for the continent to develop an implementation plan that will guarantee the supply of efficacious medicines to the 1.3 billion people on the African continent. We should be mindful that without sufficient access to medical products, our efforts to tackle diseases such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which has ravaged economies across the continent, will be in limbo. That is why this discussion is a powerful platform that will spur on our efforts to enhance vaccine production and logistics. AUDA-NEPAD's approach to local pharmaceuticals production and Africa-wide vaccine manufacture leverages on our core mandate to coordinate and execute priority regional and continental projects, to strengthen the capacity of African Union member states and regional bodies, to advance knowledge-based advisory support, as well as serve as the continent's technical interface with all Africa's development stakeholders and development partners. We can leverage the research that has been done over the years, which indicates companies are more poised to commence local production of specific vaccines or other medical products. Secondly, we leverage the good work done with regional economic communities in ensuring that the right companies in the right region are enabled to manufacture, access, and utilize regional platforms for procurement and supply chain management, and receive relevant training on-site and online. Thirdly, we leverage existing initiatives like the Partnership for African Vaccines Manufacturing Framework, PAVM, as a platform to enhance production, supported by a sound regulatory environment through the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. This is supported by the Africa Medicines Agency, AMA, which will soon be established and constitutes a turning point in our AU institutional landscape. Furthermore, AUDA-NEPAD has conceived a homegrown solutions business accelerator as an initiative which demonstrates its capacity to promote innovation in micro, small, and medium enterprises in this area of activity. Specific to the topic of today's discussion, AUDA-NEPAD is delighted to inform you and seek stakeholder support on 4 key initiatives that together we can embark on in terms of design and execution, and that I am sure will address some of the challenges that need to be addressed in order to create a robust pharma logistics ecosystem. The following initiatives currently under development will be leveraged to ensure that quality, compliance, and training are mainstreamed across the pharma logistics and supply chain system. Firstly, establishment and operationalization of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa governance framework. Secondly, development and implementation of the Africa Pharma Best Practices Framework to share best practices for advancing local pharmaceutical production. Thirdly, development and implementation of the Africa Pharma Learning Management System, providing accessible, quality, cost-effective training designed to increase individual and organizational productivity and enrichment. And then fourthly, the design and implementation of the Africa Pharma Resource Database, supporting an effective and dynamic regional research network. The ultimate goal is to strengthen the continent's ability to produce high quality, affordable pharmaceuticals and vaccines, to attract increased investments into local production in Africa, to improve the fragmented regulatory systems, and finally, to effectively coordinate the logistics and supply chain management system for medical products and commodities. Distinguished participants, I wish you fruitful discussions and look forward to a successful outcome. I thank you once again, and on behalf of Dr. Mayaki, declare this webinar special session with Pharma Logistics Africa officially open. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jennifer Chiriga, for delivering the welcome statement on behalf of Dr. Ibrahim Assane Mayaki and for officially opening this special session. I just want to inform the audience that Madam Jennifer Chiriga may have to leave the meeting during the sessions to attend to another equally important event. But we would like to really thank you so much for those words of encouragement and for showing us what the AUDA-NEPAD has been working on and intends to continue working on. So without further ado, allow me also to invite our co-host, Mr. Andrew Dowell, the CEO of GRV Global, for his welcome remarks as co-host of this event. Andrew Dowell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Janet, and thank you for those enlightening and inspiring welcome remarks, Ms. Chiriga. So a very good afternoon, and thanks for joining us here online. As CEO of GRV Global, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the webinar special session for Pharma Logistics Africa, which is on vaccine production and logistics, from local production, distribution, to access and adoption. After 2 successful years of a physical and virtual Pharma Logistics in Africa event, we are thrilled to introduce the first, and hopefully not the last, webinar for Pharma Logistics in Africa, which, as Ms. Chiriga mentioned, is co-hosted by GRV Global and the African Union Development Agency and NEPAD. We are honoured by the presence of many distinguished guests, and it's been exciting to see the development of this webinar special session over the last few weeks. I personally would like to welcome and express thanks to His Excellency Dr. Ibrahim Assane Mayaki, the NEPAD CEO, and Ms. Jennifer Chiriga, who's the Chief of Staff, who we've already heard from, for their support in the planning of this event and in co-partnering. NEPAD have actually been supporting GRV at previous events and been responsible for inviting many participants and speakers. So we're grateful to have them partner with us again here. I'd also like to thank prominent keynote speakers and panelists from USAID, from UNICEF, Pfizer, Astral Aviation, NEPAD, as I've mentioned, and attendees from leading logistics and supply chain companies, pharmaceutical companies, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, government officials, health experts, airline companies, academic research institutions for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us at this webinar. So this inaugural webinar will play a pivotal role in engaging in meaningful discussion and developing best practice among experts to improve the pharmaceutical ecosystem across Africa. This webinar precedes the third edition of our annual Pharma Logistics Africa conference, which is being held online in under 3 months' time on the 8th and 9th of December, and will help shape the content of that event. So December's Pharma Logistics Africa is bringing together both public and private sector industry experts, exploring subjects relating to pharma logistics, supply chain, local pharmaceutical capabilities, production and regulation, health emergencies, epidemic strategies, and preparedness. We'll be using an extended version of this virtual platform, which is called NIX, where attendees can engage, schedule one-to-one video meetings, visit a virtual exhibition hall, there's chat rooms, networking, lobby, and much more besides. I mean, you can probably see some of that around here. We won't be using all that today, of course, just the auditorium. But, if you, just a side note, but if you'd like to know more about our virtual platform, I'm happy to provide further information on how you can adapt it for your own events, board meetings, forums, and conferences, etc. But once again, just wanted to thank our co-host, AUDA-NEPAD, and the panelists and all of you for your valuable contribution and participation. And I wish everyone a productive and fruitful webinar. So I'll now pass back to Dr. Janet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andrew Dowell, the CEO of GRV Global, for those welcoming remarks and for thanking all the participants that have joined us, and also for highlighting what is up next for PLA editions. Now I will invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Andrew, again, another Andrew, Mr. Andrew Owain Jones, and it's my honor on behalf of the organizers of this special session to introduce you to speak on this topic, very important topic, at least globally and also on the African continent. So you're most welcome, Mr. Andrew Owain Jones.
Thank you kindly. Thanks to the organizers of the webinar, particularly for the African Union Development Cooperation, NEPAD, for inviting me, and a warm virtual welcome to the diverse set of attendees we have today. You know, we're tackling a broad issue with the spectrum of vaccine production through logistics and distribution. We're only going to be able to scratch the surface today. And I see certainly from the panel, there's a particular focus on the supply chain related to distribution. And so I'm going to spend a few minutes here to talk about the upper end, the production side that's been highlighted by NEPAD as well. UNICEF, where I work, touches on many of these issues through our work and has a keen interest in them. For myself, I joined a few months ago UNICEF at our supply division in Copenhagen after leading the health supply chain team at the foundation. And just a few words for context before I talk in a little more detail about production in Africa. Certainly UNICEF has been engaged in this issue for some time, not just in the pandemic, but have procured vaccines across the world, and particularly for the African continent. We have also, through our country offices, spent time and expertise investing in country supply chain and distribution. And in fact, last year we procured roughly $2.6 billion worth of goods, of which more than half of that, about $1.6 billion, was for vaccines. And I think many people think of us as a provider of vaccines to Gavi and to COVAX, which indeed we do. We also procure vaccines for many non-Gavi countries and have done so long before Gavi existed. And perhaps relevant to the discussions today and ongoing, we are increasingly going beyond procurement to find ways to transfer our knowledge and expertise to others. Through such things as our Vaccine Practitioners Forum and e-courses, we're finding ways to build capacity and expertise across our country partners. And our team goes beyond procurement to look at strategic issues impacting vaccine markets and think about vaccine security, which is how we talk about ensuring a sustainable and diverse manufacturing base, which links into the discussion today about production on the continent. For more commoditized products, securing the product at a low price in the most rapid way is the primary focus. But for a complex product like vaccines, where we're a large buyer, our scope and focus need to be much broader. But what I wanted to spend a few minutes on today was the quickly shifting grounds around production of vaccines in Africa, and then close with a few thoughts on the supply chain and distribution, which I think links into the discussion our panelists have had. Now, as was mentioned by the opening remarks, certainly there has been production, particularly in pharmaceuticals on the continent. Vaccines, it's fair to say, have lagged behind. Certainly for UNICEF, we have been purchasing vaccines from the Institut Pasteur de Dakar for many years, but they are unfortunately the exception rather than the rule. And I think because vaccines are so driven as a large-scale business, the conventional wisdom was that the industry would consolidate, and I mean the global industry rather than diversify. And this certainly has happened in a lot of the European and multinational firms that have collected into, formerly 3 and 4 companies have become 1. Given the complexity of vaccine production and the technical know-how, the emphasis on regional and local production had been geared towards pharma. Now that's quickly changing, driven by the very real challenges that UNICEF, COVAX, and the African Union through the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust, AVAT, have experienced trying to secure vaccines. While high-income countries have locked up supply, the lack of scale production on the continent has become a burning priority. And there are now multiple efforts to support this. We know this will take time. Clearly, the continent is far from monolithic. Some areas, if you look at this diagram I put up, gives a sense of that sort of evolution of industry over time. And across Africa, we obviously have a range within that blue area, where some, we might see, for example, South Africa, or some areas of North Africa towards the right, and others are on the left side. I think what's particularly interesting is looking at the developed industry, the sort of penultimate one on the right. And I think particularly of China and India. 2 large-scale producers of vaccines that are being distributed across the world. What did they do? How did they do it? And what does that mean for jumpstarting production on the continent? Scale is crucial, and it's true that both have had the benefit to represent massive domestic markets. This means that successfully doing so in Africa will require political discussions, collaboration and cooperation to supply multiple markets beyond where the manufacturer is based. In India, they focused on export-oriented growth, leveraging patent flexibilities. And in China, it was state-led, domestically oriented industry development. Now, these are only 2 examples. There are multiple ways that countries can travel on this path, and clearly it will require a range of efforts. As noted, South Africa has built a strong pharma base and now has the promise of expanding into COVID vaccines. With arrangements with large multinationals, in this case Pfizer and J&J with Biovac and Aspen respectively, for fill and finish as a step towards eventual end-to-end production of the vaccine. It's clear that sustainable at-scale vaccine manufacture in Africa is only possible with a stable, independent quality assurance system, and that ties into a lot of the efforts that the AU is taking, and that was certainly mentioned in the introductory address around a harmonized regulatory network. That will be crucial, as well as access to resources, both for buying the vaccines and for the development, as well as demand certainty, proper market design, and a supportive procurement system. And this is going to take efforts from across the spectrum, for governments to provide the right incentives and environment for business, for talent, high quality pharmaceutical and technical production talent. Some of this is going to happen, certainly depending on the country, from external diaspora who are returning home, and also will be crucial to develop local institutions that can foster homegrown expertise. Structured collaboration, as mentioned in the case of Biovac and Aspen, with multinational corporations can be another avenue to develop production technology and expertise on the continent. And technical assistance and support from donors, multilateral agencies. WHO, for example, has had this mRNA hub in relation to the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing and the right foreign investment environment, as well as a diversity of markets. Obviously, in many countries, the domestic market in many cases won't be enough to drive scale manufacturing, which will reduce prices. For UNICEF, we're agnostic. We want diverse, sustainable markets. Certainly purchasing outside our base of Europe and South Asia, where we tend to procure a lot of our vaccines, will provide a host of benefits. Most importantly, we're a development agency first, before our procurement service, and see this, supporting regional efforts to build production as an extension of our mission. It will be crucial that long-term aspiration is balanced with achievable near-term goals that see production start in places with existing infrastructure. And before I finish on a few related points on distribution supply chain, let me touch on a couple of other important pieces around production, which will be sourcing key components for vaccine manufacture. Right now, because of COVID, we are facing limitations on some of the key inputs for manufacturing. But it's worth noting even before that equipment costs for some of the key manufacturing pieces of vaccine production are somewhere in the range of 30% higher, excuse me, than in India or China. And while the conventional wisdom is that labor costs are lower in sub-Saharan Africa, for this kind of skilled labor, they may actually be higher. So we need to think about how we can address some of those underlying issues and recognize that buyers may be willing to pay a higher price in the near term as the industry moves along that continuum that I had up a minute ago. And in many cases, licensing deals with other companies can be complex and take time to negotiate and carry out tech transfer. So time horizons need to be realistic. In parallel to those efforts, and as I finish off, it's clear there's enormous potential across the continent to improve supply chains. So many tools and new ways of thinking exist that can be leveraged to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and resilience of supply chains. Certainly, it's been my experience that there exists a large divide between vaccine supply chains and other health products. It's not complete across all countries, but across many, this divide persists, not just in the way governments organize, but in the way they often maintain separate LMIS systems for vaccines versus other parts of the health supply chain. It's certainly true that cold chain requirements of vaccines distinguish them, but there are many other aspects of supply chain that are common. There's much to learn on improving vaccine supply chains from other product areas, whether it's fast-moving consumer goods or others. But even closer to home, there's work in health supply chains that is siloed and has not been fully exchanged between vaccines and others. I don't mean to suggest it is easy, but there's certainly untapped potential that we should be leveraging. And much like the comments on the need for high-quality talent and the investment in education and skills building, this will also be true for supply chain. There clearly are organizations like People That Deliver that spend time on this. And there are existing institutions that are African built, like the Africa Resource Center for Supply Chain that is present in a few countries. The COVID pandemic has taken a great toll, but if we can use this opportunity to strengthen systems and build back better, then we can be in a much stronger position for vaccine production and stronger supply chains in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andrew, once again for a very nice presentation, very full of information. I'm sure those who have been listening from the audience, you have some questions that you may want to already start putting out there, and some comments or any additions to the conversation that is going on. And thank you so much, Andrew, for enlightening us on what it is, the landscape of vaccine manufacturing and supply on the continent, and the different challenges that are confronting the continent, including market access, include tech transfer issues, and infrastructure, and the various market players in the field, and how and the proposals of how we could actually utilize existing initiatives to advance and address the challenges, to advance the industry and also address the challenges that are confronting the vaccine manufacturing landscape. So for now, I would like to open up to the panel discussion. And before we start the panel discussion, I just want to inform you that our panelists are really experts in the field in which they're going to be speaking. So I will give them much of the time, more than give myself a lot more to talk. So I'm going to be inviting 4 different speakers. The first speaker will be Dr. Kayode Fasominu. He is the senior manager at UNICEF. And particularly working on the UN Children's Fund and Gavi Alliance Global Immunization Supply Chain Steering Committee member. He will be in 5 minutes answering a question. I don't know if you can switch on your camera so I can see Olukayode.
Sorry, I'm in transit. As you can see, I'm trying to build capacity for the next generation of folks, so I've got my 2-year-old with me in the car. I just had to pick him up from school. So apologies if you are hearing me speak. He also wants to contribute. I've been on the call since, and he's been asking me, when are you going to talk, Daddy?
I believe we'll be glad to listen to the little man in the making to discuss this issue. So we want to ask you, Dr. Kayode, how can Africa increase the level of skills of people working in the vaccines research and development, production, distribution, and logistics value chain?
Thank you very much, Dr. Janet. I mean, that's a very fantastic question. And I listened to Andrew speak and the Chief of Staff earlier. I think they said this so really pretty well. In Africa, and of course, preparing for this, I've been able to see that there are a lot of existing strategies with a push to ensure that there's capacity to produce vaccines on the continent. You agree with me that without a robust human resource capacity, I mean, the strategy is just as good as what's on paper, So in terms of what needs to be done or how this needs to be done, I mean, given my position and the experience, I may not be able to prescribe specifically for all the countries because there are different country nuances and different countries are in different phases, as Andrew also mentioned in his presentation. But I would lay down a few guidelines and principles just to mention that as much as possible, there needs to be a balance between demand for skills and the supply. At the moment, it seems there's a huge gap in terms of demand, and specifically, we can say that across the continent, only about 10 manufacturers have the capacity to even do anything around production, packaging through the value chain. This is also very sparse across only about 5 countries, Egypt, Morocco, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. So if we're going to base demand on these few countries, that is not sufficient for a continent of over 1 billion people, with a significant number of youths, that are readily available, So as in terms of what needs to be done, of course, that balance or that demand needs to be there actively. Unfortunately, we are not there, but of course, this is an opportunity for us. In terms of the supply side, so who are the people? There's a basic need for basic science skills, from biochemists to pharmacists, chemistry, microbiology. Yes, we have universities on the continent, so in looking at the pre-service training now, the basic medical skills required. We have universities on the continent. A couple of these are top-notch, producing excellent candidates, and supporting the different bits of work across the continent and across the world. The opportunities for them are not particularly there. Again, going back to demand. So while we have universities or tertiary institutions, or even taking it further, secondary level education, where you have to be able to generate this interest, we have to be able to genuinely create that pool from these universities. The fallout of some of these discrepancies, as we will see, people switching roles in a midstream career, and not staying on course. But like I mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that there's a good balance, and within the African, again within the countries, how to strike a balance between both. My comment earlier around the nuances across countries will differ, is such that where there needs to be curriculum reviews, for example, that is an initiative that countries should take, and it's not just the ministries of health alone. Yes, vaccine production, pharmaceutical logistics ultimately falls within the Ministry of Health, but as we've seen with COVID, we say we need a whole of society approach. The Ministry of Health will not review curriculum, for example, on their own. This will be done in conjunction with the Ministry of Education, for example. And we need to begin to see this approach as not just one that sits within a health ministry alone, but across all relevant ministries, departments, and agencies across countries. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the nuances around this will have to be figured out respectively in each of the respective countries. So just to read that, because I'm trying to keep an eye on time. We understand there are a lot of opportunities that are currently existing. Daddy, why are you not driving there? I need to park just to finish, okay? That's such a smart guy. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes. I can just mute my mic. So we, as much as possible, got to be able to consolidate what currently exists in terms of capacity in countries, or on the demand side, but as well as on the supply side. Again, we don't need to stop this course. We need to update our curriculum. We need to ensure that we generate the interest. We have a very significant amount of proportion of youth on the continent, and this is easy resource that we can easily tap to on the continent. There are existing knowledge learning platforms. I mean, Andrew mentioned that earlier. But we need to be able to facilitate these learning exchanges, especially in countries that currently have existing capacities. I mentioned about 5 countries earlier. We need to be able to facilitate that, of course, within existing frameworks such as AFTA, the FCTA, but also within other economic zones within the ECOWAS region. And where these opportunities exist, leverage it to ensure that we rapidly upskill the skills available, and find opportunities to make sure there's a constant stream, there's constant flow of these resources. Of course, we can't leave out our research institutions, the resources, the training resources, the grants, the initiatives that are generated from these tertiary institutions need to be funneled into not just beyond ideas, but into reality. So we need to be able to create that market for them as well, such that the research doesn't just end in a lab. It yields result, and it brings out the desired purpose. We need, as much as possible, the how around the private sector engagement, and I think Janet mentioned that, is really critical. We've seen repeatedly that the private sector has immense resources. Government needs to be able to quickly leverage those to ensure that we carry everybody along, and where those skills already exist with the private sector, whether through private universities or private research institutions, those are readily leveraged because of the advantage of being able to cut through a lot of red tapes that sort of situate within government. Of course, the last bit I would like to mention is also ensuring quality across board. So in the educational part, how do you ensure the curriculum stays updated, regulation is intact, and there's adherence to these government policies across board? Over.
Thank you, Dr. Kayode and family.
Fast. Oh, thank you very much. Hey.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We clearly see that there is need to bridge the gap between demand and supply of skills, especially in this vaccine research and development, production, distribution, and logistics. And we need to ensure that there is a long-term sector strategy that has also coherent policies and other structures that are supportive to the production of quality products in this area. So we will be coming back to you shortly, and you and your son shortly, after other speakers, other panelists also make their intervention. So For now, let me invite Dr. Emile Bienvenu, the Director General of Rwanda FDA. In 5 minutes, Director General of Rwanda FDA, if you could introduce yourself and also tell us what has been the role of the regulatory authorities in providing oversight across the vaccine supply and logistics value chain to ensure end-to-end process and product quality. In this question, please do speak about Rwanda, but also speak about the rest of Africa in terms of the work that regulatory authorities offer in this space. Over to you, Dr. Emile Bienvenu.
Thank you very much, Janet. I just want to start by thanking the organizers of this webinar for having invited us, Rwanda and Rwanda Food and Drug Authority, to be part of this webinar session. As you mentioned, my name is Emile Bienvenu. I'm the Director General of Rwanda Food and Drug Authority since already a month, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, I'm a pharmacist by background. I'm a clinical pharmacologist and a professor of pharmacology and therapeutics because I've spent almost of my time, my career being a professor at University of Rwanda, but I've been intervening in other universities in the region as well, especially in Tanzania. But I've done some research work in the area of clinical pharmacology and supply chain management with colleagues from the region, colleagues from Makerere, colleagues from Muhimbili University in Dar es Salaam. And previously, even if I've been at university, Rwanda doing my research and my career was in academia, I've been in touch with this sector because previously, between 2011 and between 2021, I was heading the National Medical Store, currently called Rwanda Medical Supply. So I wasn't really disconnected from what is happening in this field. And I actually know what happens in other countries in Africa since I belong to the network of national regulatory bodies. So what is happening in Rwanda, if I can try to respond to your question, Janet, what is happening in Rwanda is not very different from what is happening in other countries in Africa, because most of the regulatory bodies and even in Rwanda FDA, they actually do approve vaccines before they are used on the market of different countries in Africa. And in Rwanda, this is the case, especially because regulatory bodies in Africa, they provide import permits for the vaccines after complying to importation requirements where vaccines are imported. And they also do inspection of vaccine consignments. For example, for the case of Rwanda, Rwanda FDA does inspection of vaccine consignments at port of entry, because most of the vaccines we use in Rwanda are imported. So we do inspection of vaccines consignments at port of entry to ensure quality of the products that are entering in the country. I have to clarify that, especially for the case of Rwanda, Rwanda FDA issued an emergency use authorization for COVID vaccine last year when we started receiving different batches of COVID vaccines. This is something I guess other regulatory bodies are doing in Africa. Another thing that is very important we do in Rwanda, but I know other countries does that, we actually regularly inspect the storage of facilities for vaccines and even the distribution channel is inspected by regulatory bodies just to make sure that the quality of vaccines is preserved from the central medical store up to the distribution site, even until up to the hospital where they are supposed to be used. In Rwanda, we do this from the central level, but also we do it at the decentralized level. At the hospital levels, because the vaccines are stored in hospitals in Rwanda before they are used. So we inspect all these entire value chain when it comes to ensure that the distribution doesn't affect the quality of the vaccines. Importantly, national regulatory bodies do the post-market surveillance of vaccines after being put on the market. I know very well that the countries in the region, they do that, we do that, and we even exchange information when it comes to collect data, when it comes to share information regarding the post-market surveillance of vaccine in the region. We have a platform where we share these data after we have collected these post-market surveillance information. As we regulate clinical trials for all the products, pharmaceutical products, as we also monitor the adverse drug events, we also do that for vaccines following immunization or vaccine sites. So globally, this is what regulatory bodies does in Africa. Even if I took some examples from Rwanda, I'm aware that what I was explaining is kind of common in almost all the African countries. Thank you. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emile Bienvenu, for giving us a rundown of what you've been doing and what is done globally by the regulatory authorities in relation to ensuring quality and the safety of vaccines. I will now move forward to ask Sanjeev, simply Sanjeev, to give his and the question to you, Sanjeev, is what is the one biggest challenge in the logistics of moving vaccines and other medical products across the African continent that investors can derive business opportunities from while improving access to much needed vaccines and related medical products?
Thank you, Dr. Janet, and good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm truly grateful to the organizers of PLA for inviting me to speak about vaccines and the transportation. And this is something we've been doing for the last 21 years with Astral Aviation, which is a cargo airline, having operated flights for vaccines for both UNICEF and also WHO in Africa, and having participated in various pandemics and also epidemics, including Ebola, and having some level of experience in looking at how we can improve the vaccine delivery in Africa. And we've come across a lot of challenges and also a lot of opportunities, which I'm quite happy to share with you. And when I look back at the last 20 to 21 years of transporting vaccines, it has been fairly difficult because of the lack of infrastructure that we have at African airports. And a good example, Dr. Janet, is that only 5 airports in Africa have adequate cold storage capacity at the airport to store and handle vaccines. So it's only 5 airports. And when you look at a continent of 54 countries, that is clearly an indication that we need to have more cold storage capacity in airports which currently do not have this capacity. So this is something which is very important. And we really believe that through private public sector partnerships, which is called PPP, And then one can actually be able to look at investing in cold storage equipment at the airport, whether it's mobile or permanent. Because one thing is for sure is that the pandemic is not going anywhere. We are going to see a situation where we will have future pandemics, and we really need to be prepared as a continent to make sure that our supply chain is safe, secure, and resilient. So that is the first area of opportunity. The second area of opportunity relates to the last mile. Now, what I mean by the last mile is that the real problem lies, or the real problem starts when the vaccines leave the airport and is now going through a distribution channel where the vaccines are actually delivered to primary and secondary clinics. Because one thing we must all remember is that vaccines do not save lives, vaccinations saves lives. So what we've actually seen from our experience is that we do a really great job getting the vaccines to the airport and to the cold storage facility. But what we really have noticed is that vaccines get expired, vaccines get damaged. And this really happens not at the airport, but it actually happens during the last mile delivery. So there is something that has to be done over there with regards to making sure that we have enough software and hardware to actually make sure that the vaccine is visible during the supply chain, and to actually make sure that there is no temperature incursions or any damage which will actually cause the vaccines to deteriorate. So this is again a very important factor to consider. And then the third one that I would like to talk about briefly as terms of opportunity is the cold chain capacity. Now, I'm not talking about the cold chain capacity at the airport. Now I'm actually talking about the cold chain capacity at the primary and secondary level, including cold chain capacity at the towns and villages. And I can understand that with the challenges of power in some of the countries in Africa, one has to look at temporary or mobile cold chain capacity, which can be moved from one location to the other location. And this is something which is very important, but also to look at the transportation of the vaccines at the last mile, whether it is by the use of trucks, motorcycles, drones, helicopters, it can be anything. So we really have to make sure that the storage material that is used to transport the vaccines, which is different from the one, by the way, that actually is flown from the manufacturer to the airport of destination. So you will actually see that in some cases, if you've actually transported the Pfizer vaccines, and we've actually done a lot of them, the packaging changes from the time it leaves the airline to the time it actually reaches the clinic. And I'm sure my brother from Rwanda would also agree that there are special refrigerators which have been donated to make sure that they can actually provide storage for the Pfizer vaccines. And this is something that even Rwanda has actually received. So this is very important. A third opportunity and the last opportunity, without taking up too much time, is training. We really need to make sure that we have trained personnel, especially the frontline workers. We need to make sure that they have the right level of training for handling vaccines. And very many times you've seen that you're actually having unqualified nurses who are actually providing vaccinations, and this is something which is risky. We need trained logisticians. We also need to make sure that there are trained personnel who have DGR training, especially when they're actually handling dry ice, which is something that is required for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. You know, you need a certain level of dry ice. You need to make sure that you've got people who know how to handle dry ice. And also you have special data analysts, because there's a lot of data which is involved with regards to making sure that the vaccine are actually protected. And last but not the least, you need to actually have some level of knowledge on how to actually handle cold chain products. So you cannot really put Pfizer vaccines in a warehouse where you're actually storing the AstraZeneca vaccines, because the temperature levels are totally different. The Pfizer vaccines requires -70, AstraZeneca requires 2 to 8 degrees. So you've got a big problem if you want to end up sort of storing the vaccines in the wrong place, because vaccines are not vaccines. Vaccines have to be stored in different temperatures. So I really believe that there is an importance to actually invest in training and to provide training support to actually make sure that the people who are actually trained can be able to provide the right level of services and can actually make sure that Africa will be self-sufficient in the entire supply chain of vaccines. So Dr. Janet, this is just my small contribution, from my last 21 years of experience, and I'm grateful again for being given the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev. And that is not a small contribution. That's a lot of knowledge that you have given us, and a lot of information, but also you have shown us what the challenges are and what the potential solutions. The issue of training for more skills continues to be a big issue. So we will come back to you maybe in the Q&A, but for now, may I suggest that we move to our last but not least panelist, Dr. Dianna Edgil, the Chief of Supply Chain Health Division of Office of HIV/AIDS, USAID. In 5 minutes, Dianna, I would like you to introduce yourself and your company and to tell us what role USAID has played in contributing to quality of products, compliance and training of local manufacturers and suppliers across the vaccines manufacture, supply and distribution value chain.
Thank you, Dr. Janet. So I am Dianna Edgil. I'm the division chief of the supply chain division within the Office of HIV/AIDS. I took that job back in March of 2020. And you can imagine that it's been very exciting since I took that job on. The supply chain has, for HIV, was always kind of an exciting world, but once the pandemic hit, supply chain became a very dramatic place to be. We were watching on a daily basis the number of available flights and the capacity to move product, particularly product that we were buying out of China or India, decreasing on a daily basis, and times were scary. I will say that while we had been talking about within the U.S. government about the need and the desire on the part of everyone to move manufacturing into or closer to where the product is actually being used, it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I think people got serious. And so while maybe that's a silver lining, I don't know. I wouldn't say that we're happy about it, but I think that we are actually now very much in alignment on this, on trying to find ways to improve manufacturing capacity in Africa specifically. I will say that for a long time, the U.S. government, through most of our agencies, so USAID is just one of the U.S. government's agencies. USAID, if you aren't familiar with us, we stand for the U.S. Agency for International Development. But of course, there is also the U.S. FDA. There's the U.S. CDC and the U.S. NIH as well. And all of those agencies at some level have been involved in providing technical assistance and support to manufacturers in Africa specifically. The vast majority of the work there, as well as with USAID, has been in training. It's been in working with regulatory agencies to assist with policy development, to provide some level of support in helping them to gain sort of a mature regulatory structure, and then also in working directly with manufacturers to help them to get to a point where they can and with confidence, move through a stringent regulatory authority approval process, whether that be with the US FDA or another country's FDA, or whether that be a WHO pre-qualification process. So there's been a long history of working in that space. However, I think that some of the issues that we've run up against have been, again, and many people have commented on this, many of the panelists, the speakers have commented on this concept of the amount or the price that something is going to cost. And so at least for the US government, we had always had a policy of best value. And best value means that we will buy a product that is of the appropriate quality at the lowest price. But I think that policy in some ways especially for manufacturers who are just starting out, and for manufacturers in Africa, it may exclude some of the manufacturers who are just coming online. And so the conversations that we're having now are about how to create another criteria around proximity of manufacturers to the last mile, to the end user. One of the other conversations that we're having as well is about how to convince global manufacturers to move their supply chains closer to the end user. And in some ways, we're doing this within the laboratory space by talking with manufacturers about managing their product until it is used in the laboratory. And so, for those products, which are extremely cold chain dependent, especially the molecular biology ones for COVID diagnostics and for HIV diagnostics, those products are ones that often cold chain integrity is lost. And so we struggle with this in Africa, but across the world in general, when we're trying to get those cold chain products. And this is just an omen, right, for what would happen with a vaccine as it's going into a country. So one of the questions that we've asked of manufacturers is that they take some responsibility for moving those products on cold chain. And this is very much links up with the way that Pfizer is taking responsibility for cold chain for its products until you reach the port. I think that there might be some additional capacity that we can put in there that would allow manufacturers to be responsible, or that would encourage manufacturers to be responsible for the cold chain of vaccines and for the cold chain of other cold chain dependent products until they get closer to the last mile. And these are conversations that we should have. So your question is about quality. And for me, there are two aspects to quality of a product. The first is the quality of that product when it is manufactured. And the second is the quality of that product as it leaves the manufacturing site and until it is used in whatever way it is going to be used. And those are two separate areas of interest, certainly for the US government. We've done some work in manufacturing, albeit the work that we've done with vaccine manufacturers is really only just beginning. The Development Finance Corporation of the United States has invested in a couple of vaccine manufacturers, Institut Pasteur in Senegal and Aspen Pharmaceuticals in South Africa. And the intent there is to help to set them up so that they can be producing vaccines. There's much more work that needs to go into that process and into making sure that the manufacturers do have the capability to aseptically manufacture and sterile fill final formulation. For us, we really want the product quality to be as good as any other stringent regulatory authority approved product. And I think that is absolutely possible, and that is everyone's goal. The regulatory system then is another area of interest to us, because what we don't want, I think, and I think I'm speaking for just people in general who are interested in having a vaccine. What we don't want is for there to be a product, but for the regulatory system to be so slow or to be so fragmented that the product of the appropriate quality that is close to your country couldn't be approved very quickly. And so I think one of the things that we do need to talk about is how to streamline regulatory processes. And it was really fantastic to hear that of the African Medicines Association, who are, I think, whose goal ultimately is to help to streamline that process so that we aren't working to reinvent the wheel every time we all are trying to introduce a technology into into a country, and specifically when it comes to vaccines that are critically needed. So the US government is definitely interested in that. On the other end, though, of ensuring product quality, where the product has now left the manufacturer, we have done all of the testing and are absolutely sure of bioequivalence and are absolutely sure of sterility, that we know that this product is a great product. Then the supply chain comes in, right? And so from that point that someone is responsible for maintaining cold chain and maintaining the integrity of that product. And there are many ways that can fail. It can fail because you have a lack of cold chain. It can fail because your product expires before it gets to the end point. It can fail because you have a diversion of product that results in a counterfeit product being put into place, either because it's the same product, but the expiration date has been changed, or because it's the same tube, but something else has been put into the tube. And we know that we're already seeing this across the world. People are looking at vaccines as a cash cow. They can make something off of this. And they are doing exactly that, taking expired vaccines and taking used vials and putting things into them that are not vaccines and that are a danger to our populations. So from there, one of the main ways that we're trying to have conversations, and I think Rwanda is actually far advanced in this area, is the implementation of global standards, GS1 barcoding. So that we are getting information from manufacturers on the product. We are able to quickly scan the barcode that is labeled on that product and to see where that product has been. What are the parameters of that product? Is this a product that has been used before because someone else scanned that vial to show that they had actually used it and administered a vaccine to an individual? So GS1 standards, I think, are really an area of focus for us. It is, I think, unacceptable for all of us to think that there might be something wrong with the product, especially when we've all gone to such effort to make sure that the product itself, when it comes out of the manufacturing facility, is the right one and is of the appropriate quality. And so I would ask that we all really try to consider this back end of the supply chain that can help us all to understand where our products are, whether or not they are the correct products, and then can help us to go through the entire life cycle of the supply chain in terms of waste management, so that we aren't losing sight of what we've done in the very end of the supply chain as well. So that is all from me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dianna. And as we wrap up the session, there's some questions that have been raised, and luckily, the first question is up to you. And as you finish your speech, maybe try and respond to this question from Nuran Idris. It says, to the point that Dr. Dianna Edgil raises about quality, GS1 standards have been demonstrated to show benefits across the healthcare systems all over the world, specifically on quality and broadly on multiple other benefits. But the question is to Dr. Janet. They're saying that the question is to Dr. Janet, what can be done so that African countries can actually leverage this standard to ensure supply chains, not only for vaccines, but broadly for all healthcare items? So I think, Dr. Dianna, the question is not to you, but I think they were just referring to what you have mentioned in your conversation. And so I think the question is to me as to how do we adopt that type of standards. In my Chief of Staff's and the CEO's statement, she did mention that we have certain initiatives continent-wide and regional, at regional economic community level that seek to harmonize the regulatory system and to defragment the system to ensure that not only are we able to provide oversight on and ensure quality across the products, the manufacture, but also pharmacovigilance, safety issues, and all of that is being done through the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. I think many of you may have already heard of the new institution that we are establishing at continental level that is going to be providing additional support to strengthen the regulatory systems for medical products. That will also include the more complex molecules, the vaccines, and the biosimilars and all of that, which countries currently, the national regulatory authorities may not currently have the capacity. So the institution that we're establishing very soon will be taking the role of additional and complementary support to countries that are unable currently to undertake the regulatory oversight on those type of products. So I have another question now. I hope I've answered that question to the person who asked it. Another question from Fred Seka. He is from Gorilla Logistics. He's asking, based on Sanjeev's presentation, I would like to know if they are able to provide the training program on logistics and warehousing of vaccine products. And I also would like to know if Pharma Logistics can partner with our regional training program to attend more logisticians. Yeah, I think Fred would like to create some sort of collaboration with this current platform we are convening, and also would like Sanjeev to respond to the question regarding training, if they can offer training to his type of initiative.
Thank you, Fred, for the question, and I hope you're keeping well. Yes, the issue of training is very important. Training is very expensive, by the way. We don't provide training ourselves because we usually rely on IATA, who are the ones who provide the training, and I can tell you that it's not cheap. Training for vaccines, management, training for cold chain products, these are all trainings which are conducted at the moment virtually and online. And I can actually tell you from from my experience that the cost of the training is high. It's not come down despite the fact that it's gone online. So what I really believe one has to do is to look at the whole approach holistically to try and see if there's a possibility that there can be some grant funding. And we've got Dr. Dianna here, who can actually be able to also advise. You've got certain foundations who also provide training support. In Kenya, we've got a number of organizations which give us training grants or training credits so that we can actually be able to pay for the training and actually get the money back. And I really feel that what you mentioned is so important, because we really need to look at the issue of capacity building at a national level, starting from a situation of bottom up. And this is something which is very relevant, and I really would like to encourage the organizers and also USAID to look at the possibility of actually providing support on the issue of training so that we can actually be able to build our own regional capacities and actually make sure that what responsibilities that we have in making sure that the vaccines are kept safe are actually done at a level which can be supported. So this is what I'd like to say in return. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We at the AUDA-NEPAD, and for the panelists that have the capacity to support this type of initiatives, you may have heard that we are establishing a digital platform where we can put material, both audio, video, and written material for training. And it can be across the whole pharma value chain, so including the procurement and supply and logistics issues. So I think we can put material there for anyone who would like to access it at any time of when either as an individual or as an institution. So we would like maybe to have an offline conversation with those interested parties to see whether we can support the Africans as such as Seka, who is asking Sanjeev such a question, that we have a platform continent-wide that information and training can be shared. Training material can be shared with these individuals and organizations. So if there are no further questions, which I don't see, someone is asking another question and is saying we'll chat offline. So anyway, I think we are almost coming to the end of our discussion today, and would like to already thank you all the panelists for the very valuable information that you've shared. And like now to someone has a final question regarding the different storage conditions of the various vaccines. I have a concern regarding how they are assured. That is Nelly Kimani. The different storage conditions.
I believe you might be talking about insured, Janet?
Yes. I'm
yes,
reading the question.
If it is about insurance, yes, vaccines are generally insured at the level from the time they leave the factory to the time they reach the airport, which is the airport of destination. So typically, when you look at the Covishield vaccine, which is manufactured in India, it's actually insured from the time it leaves the facility in Pune, which is at the Serum Institute, and it arrives at the airport in Mumbai, and then it's shipped to wherever it might be required. So that entire part is insured. The problem actually starts that the insurance is no longer valid from the time it leaves the cold chain facility. And that is where at the national level, there has to be insurance which has to be put in place, because vaccines are expensive and vaccines do get spoiled, vaccines do get damaged, vaccines do get lost. And it's really funny, but vaccines do really get lost as well. So there has to be some level of insurance. And I believe that has to be undertaken at the local level. And I think that's important. But Dr. Janet, with your permission, I just wanted to say that on the issue of training, I really believe that the manufacturing of the vaccines is a very profitable venture for the vaccine manufacturers, with due respect to them. And I really believe that they have to make some level of contribution from the profits towards capacity building, especially in Africa, which is where a lot of the vaccines will eventually come to. So I really believe that we must appeal to AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, and also, I don't know if I missed out anybody, but probably Sinopharm, to actually make some level of contribution towards capacity building from the excessive profits that they will be making in this entire exercise of manufacturing vaccines, so that we can actually be able to use some of these resources in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to give you 30 seconds for each of the panelists to say a final word, the recommendation they would like to make to improve the supply of vaccines in Africa and other medical products. What is that one thing in 30 seconds that you think needs to be the investment that Africa should focus on in order to improve access to affordable vaccines and other medical products? I'll start with Sanjeev, the last speaker, and then go to Dr. Dianna, and then Emile, I think, has asked to leave, and then we'll close.
Thank you, Dr. Janet. I really believe that there are two things which are very important, and both of them start with a C. The first one is cooperation, and the second one is collaboration. And when you look at these two C factors, the combination of the cooperation, the combination of the collaboration is so important for the supply chain. And I really believe that we will actually be able to create a resilient supply chain for as long as there is cooperation and collaboration between all members of the supply chain, both at the international level the regional level and the national level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Collaboration and cooperation and resilience. Dr. Dianna.
So I won't repeat what Sanjeev has said. I think that that is very, very important. And I'll maybe be a little bit more concrete. Maybe one thing that's concrete and then one thing that's maybe a little less concrete. And for which I am asking your help, really. The first, I think, is the implementation of GS1. I think that one of the issues that we really do need to grapple with is countries requiring that any health product that enters their country be labeled with GS1, that we as the US government, as well as all other procurement parties, are creating contracts that require GS1 labeling, and that ultimately we are setting up ways in which we can share that information that comes from the manufacturers with the country level information, at the country level, and possibly even across borders, to ensure that the products that we have are the products that we think we have, and that we are tracking them from end to end. The other thing that I will talk about, and this wasn't anything that had to do with quality, so it didn't come up in what I had said, but is creating a more permissive environment for manufacturers to operate. Things that we've been talking about within the US government are how to create contracts with manufacturers that help them to do the job that they need to do. If it is that there is a need for initial investment, like what the DFC has done, then yes, absolutely. But what we see often is that that many startups struggle when it comes to access to working capital that they can then use to buy key starting materials, and that they can use to set themselves up for an order that is being placed. In many cases, procurers will pay after delivery, and that makes it difficult for manufacturers to do what they need to do. So helping to really figure out what that looks like. How can we convince banks that they should be investing in manufacturers that exist in Africa, that it's a good investment, and that governments are going to continue to procure, assuming the quality of the product is consistent, that are going to continue to procure from these manufacturers, so that there isn't a question and that there isn't an issue with finances that ultimately can really destroy a manufacturer's ability to continue. That was more than 30 seconds, but I really do think that it's important.
I know.
So sorry.
You've covered for Emile, who is not there. And maybe Dr. Kayode, are you still with us? No, Dr. Kayode and the family have left, unfortunately. But thank you all panelists. I gather that from you, Dr. Dianna, that incentives are critical, and they can be provided by government through procurement, through access to affordable capital, and through policy incentives that would allow for manufacturers to operate optimally. I also gather that from at least Sanjeev, that it's important to strengthen the logistics infrastructure by training more and more skills, and by investing deliberately and with an effort from both the government and private sector to ensure that we have the right skills in place, so that we can be able to create the integrated logistics infrastructure required. From my side, as we conclude, I would like to mention three things that I feel we need to focus on going forward. I need to mention the fact that we need our manufacturers to be compliant to the internationally acceptable standards, and I need to see investment going into the training to develop the requisite skills, and the issue of quality. So the three things that I've run through this conversation is quality, compliance, and training. And I think across the value chain of both manufacturing, distribution, and of vaccines, it's very important. I would like to end this conversation now and to wish you all who attended the best of the remaining hours of the day, and then maybe meet you in December for the PLA. And those who would like to connect between now and December, you're always free to email us on our different emails, which PLA organizers will be sharing with all of you. So we await the report and do hope that we continue this conversation offline and next time online. Thank you so much, and goodbye to everyone.